This next conversation is an important one. I want to invite to the stage a group who are going to talk about more reasons than Tuskegee. We're going to welcome to the stage the dynamic Reverend Dr. Tawana Angela Davis, co-founder of Soul to Soul Sisters and mobilizer at Carrie's Touch. We're going to welcome, please, a round of applause, yes. We're going to welcome back Reverend Dr. Tammy Denise, the president and co-founder of Carrie's Touch. And we're going to talk some more about more reasons. I'd like to also invite to the stage Marissa Thomas, the CEO and co-founder of For the Breast of Us. And I want us to talk about clinical decisions and how patients are doing with respect to Tuskegee. Does it matter? Does it still matter? And how do we move past it if we can't move past it? How do we talk about it if we need to move beyond it? And let's talk about some of the complexities in patients' understanding of the historical and earned medical mistrust and what we need to do moving forward with an eye on solutions. I'm going to come sit with all of you. All right. And first, I'm going to ask you, Reverend Dr. Tawana Davis, tell us a little bit about your story and your experience with clinical trials, if you would.
Sure. Don't get nervous. I'm a preacher, but I know how to keep it short. Okay. I want to begin by reciting a poem by Lucille Clifton. Won't you celebrate with me, who I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model, born in Babylon, born non-white and woman. What did I see except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something that has tried to kill me has failed. And that's how I felt when I was diagnosed with cancer, with 2 additional recurrences, with 3, 4 near-death experiences. But it's because of people like Ricky, who was on a clinical trial for carboplatin, that I'm here. It is because of a dear friend of mine who was on a clinical trial for Herceptin, why I am here. And the clinical trial, as we look back and have this Sankofa moment about Tuskegee and Henrietta Lacks, and those things are real and they're scary, but I had a team of doctors that I did trust, and they treated me like family. And when my recurrence came, one of the doctors said, Tawana, if you were my sister, I would tell you to go get a second opinion. Go get a second opinion. And then I had to switch my team of doctors to go get the clinical trial because clinical trials weren't available at the hospital that I was in. So it's a lot of layers to even considering a clinical trial, let alone what you have to go through. And I'm here today because of the clinical trial that was mentioned earlier. I was one of the Black women on that trial. I was on it for a year, and unfortunately my body responded adversely, so they had to take me off. But I'm still here 6 years later because of it.
Wow. Thank you for that. Marissa, would you tell us your story and a little bit of the background on why you co-founded For the Breast of Us?
Sure. So my name is Marissa Thomas. I am an early stage breast cancer thriver. I co-founded For the Breast of Us with Jasmine Sowers, who you guys heard from earlier. And one of the reasons why is that we wanted more representation within the breast cancer community, not only from Black women, but for all women of color in general. So that is one of the reasons why we started For the Breast of Us and why I'm here.
Thank you for that. Let me open up this line of questioning and say, or ask the question, you know, you spoke about your clinical trial and your experience, and you had a team of providers that you trusted. Did they look like you? Does it matter if they look like you, and to what extent does it matter?
Says the racial justice advocate. It does matter, but none of my team look like me. So it was even more important for them to see me to hear me, to honor my story, to know my children's name. My daughter, who was my caregiver, who was 30-something years old, relocated to take care of me. They knew this, but they didn't look like me, unfortunately, but they had this epistemological curiosity.
Ooh.
That's what happens when you get a PhD. You start using big words. But really, it's about knowing, having this curiosity instead of judgment. So that was really big for me.
Wow, and Emily, let me rope you in and ask you, how do you let a patient know that they're seen and that you understand when you don't have that same lived experience?
Absolutely. Great question. I really appreciate what I was hearing earlier. I think really just coming into the room and sitting down, just sitting down and really taking some time just to, be together in that moment. So that was always important to me, just to really just connect. And I do think it's important to know the family and to know, holistically the patient. And so, again, I think that's very important as caregivers. I was encouraged by the data I think that you shared earlier, although we may not be representing the same race, that we can come together, but, bedside manner, building that trust and those that time together. So I was encouraged by that. But again, very important just to, again, be personal, I think, with that patient and their family.
Thank you for that. Reverend Tammy, let me bring you in and ask you, sometimes I hear patients say, well, I guess this is as good as it gets, and that they feel like they don't have the right to ask for more. How important is that second opinion, and are people still afraid to get that opinion? What advice would you give them?
Great question. I think the second opinion is crucial. We've talked about lack of trust in our communities, and so a way to begin building trust is through obtaining a second opinion. And here's where the second opinion gets tricky. I heard someone say, if you don't get a second, you might need a third, and so on and so forth. Understanding the disease is crucial, because sometimes a patient does not have the privilege and the opportunity to get those second and third opinions because they've already presented at later stages, and their timeline is shorter. So it's also crucial in acknowledging the importance of education from physicians. Dr. Mo, we were talking over at the table, and I said, if I had had a doctor like you, I probably would not have begun Carrie's Touch, because I would have had the things I needed to navigate my breast cancer journey successfully. So thank you for being a patient advocate and always making sure that the patients are educated and aware of clinical trials, of what their disease state is, and what the impact of making a decision in a timely manner so that they can continue to get the best care available for them.
Wow, thank you for that. Marissa, let me ask you about clinician bias, being young with breast cancer, and I hear too often patients and advocates will say, they told me I was too young for breast cancer. They told me I was too young for a mammogram. They said it was probably fibrocystic, and they sent me on my way. Can you talk about the experience of being an advocate at a young age and how that shapes the work that you do today?
Yes. There's a good synopsis that I give regarding, bias, in that we all have bias or privilege. And, for myself, I work in healthcare, and so that is my privilege. So I know how to navigate the system, whereas a layperson may not know how to do that. And so when you have that privilege, it's up to you to be able to use that privilege and help the people behind you who do not have that same type of privilege. And I think when we talk about privilege and bias, those are the things that people need to understand. And as being an early stager, it's up to me to make sure that my sisters or the people who are living with metastatic breast cancer, that they get access to the same type of treatments or resources that I have, regardless of when you were diagnosed, whether you were diagnosed at a young age like myself or you were diagnosed when you were older. You should still be able to have those resources.
Wow, thank you for that. I want to talk about Tuskegee because people will mention it and they may not even know what the trial was, what happened, and really fully understand all of it. But it's a dog whistle, right? It's a call for us that represents a period in time where we were experimented upon, right, without consent. How do we move beyond that? When you talk to patients about clinical trials and you talk to your breasties, how do you get beyond that point when they say, but Tuskegee, but Henrietta Lacks? What's your response? Sure.
Well, my response is to take a moment, take a beat, and acknowledge that Tuskegee happened. And then acknowledge that medicine has continued to move forward. And then acknowledge that we know that there are medicines that are being formulated that don't have our bodies, our DNA, and all of those things represented in the clinical trials. And I get to say that, whatever, I was a young survivor as well. I get to say that whatever year it is that I'm a blah, 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 now 18-year breast cancer survivor who participated in a clinical trial. And so something is moving in the right direction. And if you have someone like myself who walk alongside of you and help you understand it, because I was given 32 pages of possible side effects. And the researcher scheduled an hour-long appointment with me, and 4 hours later, she was still there answering my questions. So if you have someone like myself or someone that you find that you can trust to walk alongside of you, would you consider it? And most people say yes.
If I may add, there is a Ndinkra symbol, African Ndinkra symbol, Sankofa, and it's a bird flying forward with an egg in its mouth, but its face is facing backward. So they're flying forward, face backward with an egg in its mouth. So it means go back and fetch it. So there is something that we can learn from Tuskegee. There is something that we can learn from what happened to Henrietta Lacks. It is something that we can learn about the reproductive justice and about women's bodies being mutilated and abused. So there is something, so we gotta name it. We can't forget about it. So when we were in our subcommittee and when Sheila was like, no, it's more than just Tuskegee, and I was like, shit, okay. That's what's up. We're building on that. So we can't forget, but we don't want to keep holding on to that. We want to grow. We want to move forward and learn from what happened and have the language to advocate for ourselves where our beloveds did not have that language, the power, the strength, the community to fight back against the ills that happened against them.
Right, and if, healthcare is going to continue to move forward, we need to move with it regardless at the end of the day. We could talk about Tuskegee all we want to, and we understand what happened then, and some of us may not, and we still have to do some education there, but at the meantime, if we want to still participate in clinical trials, they're still going to move forward, and we need to be involved in that process as well.
I totally agree. I liken it to, I'll often say when we're at the table, we are not necessarily on the menu, right? Because we are able to advocate and be in these spaces. So my next question is for you, is for Emily. So bias is real, we know it. And some people said it's the elephant in the room. It is pervasive, and we all have bias, both implicit and explicit. What does allyship look like? How do you and how do navigators, I guess the best question is, what is your organization putting into place to help train a generation of allies that are equipped to combat and interact bias when you see it, right? Because as providers, sometimes we're complicit, or we'll just kind of say, ooh, that was cringy, but we may not speak up in those moments. So what are you advocating for and teaching nurses, and what's your society doing to really help move the needle in that direction?
I think you've hit it well. I think, and I learned this as a navigator, even going out into the community to even do breast risk assessment. But again, we have to learn from others. And so again, I think for us to move forward as a society and have that education really is going to have to come from that Black navigator to us, and to, again, really teaching us so that we can move forward for all of our navigators. So again, we want to go back to our partners and our grassroots and those that really know the community and be open to that to move forward.
Thank you for that. And my last question for all of you is this. We know what harm looks like, what it feels like, what it tastes like. We can smell, we can sense it a mile away, right? What a negative interaction feels like. What does repair look like? What does a whole and a rich and collaborative experience look like in the healthcare system?
I'll be happy to start. It is definitely holistic, but it centers the harm and the hurt, and we then journey together toward healing. So we got to be able to name it, and I use this example all the time. If I have a cut on one arm and a broken wrist on the other, I'm not going to put a Band-Aid on the broken wrist and the cast on the cut, right? So we have to be able to acknowledge it and then move together and journey together, along with knowing ourselves, loving ourselves. When I was diagnosed with cancer, one of the first things Carrie's Touch and another breast cancer support organization told me to love myself, to put myself first, and to focus on healing and not the cancer. And my writing teacher said, if you what you focus on expands, and Dr. Mo, you alluded to this earlier today. If I focus on the cancer, I'm not going to heal. It's going to continue to, it wants my attention. So if I focus on the healing and have the community around me, which includes you, which includes patient navigators and family and doctors and nurses, then we journey together toward this healing and naming the hurt and the layers of trauma that we have to deal with as Black women.
I would just say I think it's seeing the whole person, not just them as breast cancer, or not just their breast cancer diagnosis, just seeing the whole person. I think once you see the whole person and you make it, you know, as Jasmine stated earlier, like a human experience, then you understand who that is and you can move forward from that point.
Malcolm X said that Black women in America were the least protected, the most disrespected, and there's a third one in there. And when I internalized what he was saying, I felt a pit in the, in the gut of in the core of my stomach. And Carrie's Touch, our mission is to humanize the Black woman. Let's start there. Humanize the Black woman and her experience with breast cancer. And so if you talk to, and with our Project SOAR research, so many times the women felt like a number. They didn't feel like a person. So many women, because of the Strong Black Woman schema, do not understand what healing looks like for them. So when we encourage patients to focus on healing, we first ask them to define healing for themselves. And once they can articulate what healing looks like for them, then they can chase after it. So I think when we talk about, healing, it is understanding that healing is available to people that look like us.
Wow. Can't be what you can't see. Wow. Are there any closing remarks from all of you? Any final thoughts on moving beyond Tuskegee?
Well, you see, I try to be equitable, right?
We know you got it, so
I try to be equitable.
Go ahead, wrap it up, seal it tight. Go ahead.
The thing that we've talked a lot about a lot of things, and talked about having a seat at the table, and sometimes, you're not on the menu, or you are actually the menu. And so if we really want to make sure that we are equitable in this work that we are doing, everybody here will leave, and Mahima, I think, said it best. She asked us to raise our hands if we had an organization before George Floyd. And then she asked, how many of us had the type of funding we have now, right before? And there were very few. So if you really want to achieve equality, it's not just one organization. It is a matter of all of us figuring out how we come together, and we don't have to mimic each other. We are beautiful, colorful people, and we show up differently and allow us to be who we are, serve fully in our lane, and we can do this thing together. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you so very much. A round of applause for Reverend Tammy Denise, Reverend Tawana Davis, and Marissa Thomas for the rest of us. Thank you. And Emily also. Thank you so much.